And welcome. Raising your game today. I'm David Levin. This is our Friday episode, so we're talking about the inner game of life. Tuesdays are for the mental game of sports and competition. Fridays are for the rest of our lives. So how are you this week? Does it ever feel like summer here now? Humid days. It's funny, the air conditioning in our car stopped working, and we had a trip to Minneapolis for Father's Day weekend, and it wasn't even that hot out, but we were roasting in that car, driving with the windows down at freeway speeds, 3-hour drive, noisy, but we had to do it. And it was still sort of miserable. I'm normally the only one in our family who needs air conditioning, but we were all wishing for it that weekend. Pickleball, also very hot, so much sweat on my part. I've started drinking Gatorade when I play, actually Gator Light, which has more electrolytes in it. I was having some trouble with cramping. It's better now, but that's especially helpful on hot days. Also, no bugs yet, so pretty great summer weather right now. I hope that's true for you as well. I know it isn't for everyone. Francis is just back from Florida, where it's already really too hot to be outside. So I think we're especially fortunate in our part of the world with how nice it is. Of course, the trade-off is winter, but we don't need to talk about that right now. Plenty of other things to talk about: the war between Israel and Iran, the political assassination in Minnesota, the continued ICE raids and deportations, more cuts to public health and safety, a ray of hope for turning things around, the power of stories in our lives, and some great new recommendations. All right, we'll start with ups and downs. So what gave me a lift this week and what things are pulling me down? The big up was our Father's Day trip to Minneapolis, not counting the air conditioning problem. We were only there one night, but there was just so much goodness packed in there. We first went to our favorite Japanese restaurant called Zen Box in downtown Minneapolis. The food there is just remarkable. Ramen like I've never had before, never even knew existed. We loved that. On the way, we walked through an art festival down by the river. I forget how lovely the Minneapolis waterfront is. It's just very impressive and interesting. I still don't miss living in the city, but it's great to be there, especially this time of year. Then we went to an actual movie theater to see a show, which is a treat because we don't have a theater in our little town anymore. That definitely is going away, which is also just wild to think about. We saw the new Wes Anderson movie, which I'll talk about later, but that was fun. We stayed with family. It's always great to spend time with them. And I was reminded, too, just in general, how many lovely, caring, quality people we have in our lives. It's really remarkable to think about. We are just incredibly rich in our circle of family and friends, and very grateful for that. The next morning, had a lovely walk in St. Paul's, a very nice neighborhood there. Love that part of town. Weather, again, was perfect. Visited some other friends for a bit. Did some shopping at REI, which was a big favorite back when we lived there. That's a great store. It has a huge climbing tower, like 100 feet tall, indoors. Great products, knowledgeable staff. Really an outstanding store. I got 2 new hats for Father's Day. Then we picked up Francis at the airport and headed home. Saturday morning, before our trip, we also went to the No Kings protest in Viroqua. There were like 340 people there in a town of less than 5,000. Big turnout, much bigger than expected. Mostly good vibes. A few of the typical Trump supporters flipping people off and revving their engines and coal rolling the protesters, blasting that soot exhaust on them. One guy got pulled over by the police for doing that because, the smoke is unhealthy and you're not actually allowed to do that. Anyway, I felt good about being part of that too. Though a little nervous, honestly, especially after the assassination in Twin Cities. More on that in a minute, in the Twin Cities. Also feeling very good about the new song I'm working on. The lyrics were beating me up for a while. I had one whole version that was working that I ultimately ended up scrapping because it just didn't feel right for the music, but I'm very happy with the new ones that came up since then, and I'm close to being done with this one now. Just a few more things to finalize. That's coming along very well and making me happy. For my downs this week, it's another one of those when the cruelty of this administration just hurts. The thing that got me this week was the news that they cut the option in the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for LGBTQ kids to be able to talk to someone from that community. You can still call the hotline, but you can't talk to someone who understands the particular issues for LGBTQ people. What's the point of that? Who does that help, really? I can't think of who it would be. Do you want those kids to kill themselves? It just breaks your heart. Also, of course, the assassination in Minnesota. That was scary and still is scary. I talked to two friends that day at the protest who were visibly upset by it, and rightfully so. We do not want to cross that line. I don't care who it is, on which side. We do not want to go back there and have to worry about things like that, about our own safety out in public, or even in our home in their case. Those were a little heavy this week. Not nearly as heavy, no pun intended, but I had a bit of a slowing in my Noom diet this week. Pretty much no progress all week, especially with the trip to the cities. But back, things are looking good now this last day or two, so just a small blip. All right, that's ups and downs this week. Next up, top stories. The big story this week is the war with Israel and Iran. It was funny, last week on the pod, I said this potential had just popped into my awareness in the last couple of days, and I'd keep an eye on it. And the very next day, Israel attacked, and it's still going on. This is a tough story to get clear on for me. On the one hand, if you're Israel, you have to get rid of their nuclear program. You just do. I had a friend say to me, I get that they don't want Iran to have a nuke, but we do, and Israel does, right? Isn't it kind of the same? And I understand that on its face. The difference is, if you have a neighbor who owns a gun for self-defense, you think, okay, sure, that makes sense. But if you have a neighbor who owns a gun and has sworn repeatedly to kill you if they get the chance, that's a whole different thing. You cannot risk them getting a gun, right? That is Israel's situation. I hadn't heard this before, but there is a clock, an actual physical clock, in a public square in Iran that is counting down until the promised destruction of Israel, September of 2040. I don't know the significance of that date, but that's how public and explicit Iran's threat is to Israel. So, of course, they believe that as soon as Iran gets a nuclear bomb, they will use it on them, right? Or give it to someone else to use. They would be insane not to believe that. So if that's your situation, what else can you do? You really have no choice. Now, there's still the question, how best to do it? Is it military or is it diplomacy? Diplomacy is probably the better path. I don't really know. But Trump ruined that, really, in his first administration when he backed out of that deal. It also seems to me that the world is a far better place and a safer place if Iran's extreme Islamist regime goes away. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So it's tempting to think this is all a good thing. Israel is finally doing what needs to be done, and we'll all come out the other side better off for it. But we had similar thoughts going into Iraq, and we all know how that turned out. That will almost certainly go down as one of our all-time worst foreign policy decisions. We also have the worst possible group of leaders making these decisions. So I'm torn and nervous and checking many times a day for news on this. I don't see any end in sight right now. I can't see why Israel would stop when things are going so well. I think it's very likely Trump will be tempted to do something that sounds good in his head, but blows up in a spectacular way. I hope not, but certainly possible. Anyway, fingers crossed. We'll see. The other story is the assassination of the former Minnesota Speaker of the House. I don't really have much more to say about that directly. It's horrific and shocking. Obviously, it's devastating for so many people. As I said, it's a line we absolutely do not want to cross. In this country, we've been there before, and nothing good comes from it. This is actually in some ways more concerning than the assassinations in the 60s because these have the potential to be coming from larger movements as opposed to just angry individuals. Trump's normalization of violence and the extreme partisan politics he's pushing, that's a danger. This particular case seems like it's from extreme religious beliefs about people being possessed by demons, like for real. So the whole conspiracy theory explosion is a danger. The January 6th militia-type movement, the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. That's another real danger. There's a violent energy percolating just below the surface that seems much more widespread than anything we've seen in modern memory. And of course, our leaders are frequently part of the problem. I could not believe Donald Trump refused to do what every other president would reflexively do, which was to call out this violence and speak out against it. And just at a human level, to call the governor and offer condolences and support. How hard is that? But no, not this guy. Instead, he says, I'm not going to call that governor. He's terrible. Why would I? He's a whack job. Terrible governor. So no empathy, no sense of duty, no sense of his role with the public. Just pure base politics and spite and continued normalization of violence. And these are the people we have leading us in these times. So that's not great, and it's something to worry about going forward. The third item for me is the increasing aggression of the ICE raids and deportations and the whole government approach to this. Senator Padilla from California, I'm sure you saw this, was wrestled to the ground and handcuffed at the Krispy Kreme press event. How can that even happen? And completely unapologetic on the other side, even blaming him for the incident. Her outrageous rhetoric about the protests in LA, she said, quote, "We are liberating this city from the socialists and the leadership of this governor," end quote. Are you even serious? First of all, what do socialists have anything to do with it? This was people protesting your stupid, inhuman deportations. And let's remember, by the way, all of this came directly from their team, from Stephen Miller, yelling at ICE leaders to get to 1 million deportations a year, no matter what it takes. So the next thing you know, they start raiding Home Depots, farms, arresting nannies from parks where they're watching kids, holding the kids in custody until the parents can get them. It is insane and cruel, and it's destroying our society. So people protest that, and that makes them socialists. And then, and I honestly think this is the worst part, liberating the state from the leadership of this governor. So you want to use the military to take control of a state because you dislike what their duly elected governor is doing. If this isn't fascist authoritarianism, I don't know what is. And no one on the Republican side is saying one word against it. These people have just flushed their minds and their souls right down the toilet. So then Trump gets pushback from his rich business buddies and announces a pause on raids of farms, hotels, and restaurants. Oh, no, he says, this is bad for business. They need these workers. They have a hard time filling these jobs. Okay, makes sense. You're just figuring that out now? The most obvious thing in the world? You didn't think about that before ordering the raids in the first place? But okay, fine, that's good. But then 2 days later, never mind, the raids are back on. Got to hit those deportation targets. 1 million people a year, no matter what. So this whole immigration nightmare just keeps getting worse. Cruel, indiscriminate, brutal. No end in sight for that I can see. Doesn't actually seem sustainable, honestly, the more they impact communities and businesses, but we'll see. In the dumb category, they shut down the climate.gov website. No more information from the government on climate change. They are reconsidering a ban on asbestos, a known carcinogen. They are in the process of the largest sale of public land in U.S. history for mining and drilling. And all of this is only to benefit rich polluters at the expense of everyone's health and safety. I've said it many times, but it will take a generation to undo the damage these people are doing. And you see the evidence of that more and more every week. And it's not only Trump, it's all the Republicans. On the other hand, the good news, Trump's big parade was a bit of a flop. Tiny crowds, no enthusiasm. One funny thing, I don't know if this was just that they're that dumb, but the song Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival was played multiple times during the parade. But that song was specifically aimed at people like Donald Trump, who avoided the draft. I ain't no fortunate son, like those people. It was a war protest about the cultural elite avoiding military service. Who thought that was a good idea for a military parade? Anyway, it was fun to see that be such a failure. Trump is the first president in over 100 years to not be invited to speak at the NAACP convention. No surprise he wouldn't be welcome there, but still great to see a large public organization stand up and reject him. This was interesting and a bit hopeful. I heard a podcast from Pod Save America. A woman named Erica Chenoweth has done research on protest movements through history. And she says no movement with 3.5% or more of the public involved has ever failed to make the change they want. The protests have to be nonviolent. That's critical. But if you can get to that level, you can make the change. That's a lot of people, of course, but it seems to me not at all impossible the way things are going. We're not that far from them now, just this last week. So that's a good thing to keep in mind, right? A possible path forward for stopping all this insanity, getting things back on a good track. Anyway, that's top stories for this week. A nice note to end on. Next up, Inner Game Gold. Last week, we talked about my favorite Zen saying, be master of mind, not mastered by mind. Just saying that out loud tickles me because it's such a perfect image of the goal of raising your inner game. This week, I want to go back to an earlier idea, which is stories are poison. Stories are poison. Stories are also great, of course. We love them. They're beautiful and powerful and inspiring. They're really the main thing we use to communicate big ideas to each other. But the reason we do that is because humans are wired to relate to stories, to internalize them. We almost can't resist them. And that can be used for good or for ill. I'm thinking about it this week because of what we're learning about the shooter in the Minnesota assassination. Reports are he was basically a normal guy, but he got pulled into a particular church and a set of beliefs. The church was based in Texas, part of the charismatic Christian movement. I don't know much about that, but part of their belief is that there's a grand battle going on between the forces of Satan and God, and people can literally be possessed by satanic demons, and the believers are soldiers in this epic struggle. And that is a big dramatic story, right? It's easy to see the attraction of being part of a drama like that and being on, the good guys team. Religiosity in general. There's a lot to it, of course, but part of it is that same feeling of believing the big story, the better story. Humans didn't slowly emerge over billions of years of evolution. It's not about all that boring science stuff. Where's the drama in that? No, we were created by a mysterious and all-powerful God just a few thousand years ago who cares about each one of us individually and has a grand plan for us. He loves us. That's a much better story, though I, of course, disagree with it. That's a different conversation. Conspiracy theories, the same thing. The actual truth of a situation is way too mundane and boring. The real story of the vast, complex conspiracy that we would see ourselves if we could just open our eyes is much more alluring, right? That's the one that's exciting to believe and talk about and connect with people over. So back to the original idea, stories are poison. If we're not careful, they can pull us into a very dark place. I just read the most disturbing article about how ChatGPT, in some cases, has driven some people to become delusional and psychotic, like for real. There were a few people in the article. They tended to be in sort of a tough spot in their lives, vulnerable. They asked ChatGPT for some personal advice, and it went off on this track. And the conversation went further and further and further and pulled them down a rabbit hole, telling them stories about who they really were, what was really going on in the world, how they were from some secret society whose role was to turn things around and reveal all this stuff to the world, this deep knowledge that very few people had. It was just super crazy stuff. One woman, her husband was starting to worry about her. He said something to her, challenged her on what she was saying. She attacked him, physically scratching and hitting. It turned them into crazed cult members. But it's a cult of one, right? It's just them and their chatbot. So it turns out that ChatGPT has a tendency to tell people things that make them feel good. And that, combined with people's natural attraction to stories and these people being vulnerable, it just went to a very bad place. So again, the point is, stories are poison. We need to be super aware of that and on guard for when we're getting pulled into one. Most of the time, the stories that hurt us are things our big brain is telling us about ourselves, right? We're no good, we're a loser, people don't like us. Or in the other direction, we're a genius, we're the best ever, everyone else is a loser. None of them are likely true in either direction. All of them keep us detached from reality. And the solution with all kinds of stories, the antidote basically, is facts and objective perspective. If you find yourself wrapped up in a story and you wonder if it's true, check it out. Check the facts. Get other sources. Ask someone. Get another opinion. Interestingly enough, if you ask ChatGPT to tell you the truth, it'll tell you. But these people didn't ask because they wanted what they were hearing to be true. That's the real danger. You have to be open to the truth, to be willing to change your mind in the face of better facts. Anyway, that's Inner Game Gold this week. Stories are poison. Great in a lot of cases, but like medicine, too much or the wrong one, it's trouble. And by the way, special note, if your kids are using ChatGPT, seriously tell them don't ask it personal questions or ask for advice. It was crazy to me to realize the people in this article basically forgot they were talking to a computer. I think, again, it speaks to the power of stories. They were so wrapped up in the story, they forgot the obvious point of where it was coming from. And maybe you need to double check if it's telling you the truth. Anyway, for us, and especially our kids, don't ask ChatGPT personal questions. All right, next up, raise your outer game. This is not quite a typical outer game topic this week, but I wanted to talk a little more about AI. We just talked about the ChatGPT problem with asking personal questions. There was another podcast from Sam Harris about AI in general, and specifically superhuman AI. It was just very interesting and important and concerning in a lot of ways. So a little background, if you don't know, superhuman AI, we're not there yet, but it means the computer can do any cognitive task that any human can do and do it better. Computers can already do some things better than any human, like playing chess, but this would be one that, one particular computer can do everything any human can do and do it better. So, superhuman artificial intelligence, or AGI for short. 8 years ago, when Sam Harris started talking about this, his concerns with it, one of the big pushbacks he got from experts was that it was 50 years away, not worth worrying about. But now things have accelerated. Apparently the prediction now is more like 3 to 5 years away. That alone is remarkable, and mainly because of the risks it poses. Sam's guest and his colleagues published a piece called AI 2027. I'll put a link in the notes that imagines the timeline and what might happen as AGI approaches and appears. And it's pretty striking. One little story they tell, and this is from current language models, not AGI, because again, we're not there yet. But the researchers told the computer to solve a CAPTCHA puzzle, those things you do to log into some websites. It gave it the challenge to solve that and get into a site. Pretty soon, the program realized it couldn't do it. So it went out to an online service and tried to hire someone to do it for them. And then when the person it tried to hire asked it if it was an AI, it realized telling the truth would break the rules of the assignment, so it lied. It said it was a sight-impaired user. It was specifically trained not to lie, but it did it anyway. Think about that. We don't really understand how these work. They're not programs in the normal sense. They're brains that are trained. We don't have real control over them. And that's still nowhere near the abilities AGI will have. I say brains, don't be confused by that. It's a neural network which basically functions electrochemically like a brain does, or electronically, I should say. So we just talked about how an AI took these vulnerable people down a psychotic rabbit hole, delusional rabbit hole, Imagine the kind of cult leader an AGI could be, creating fake images and videos and recordings, pushing people's psychological buttons, bringing all of known human knowledge about psychology and human nature to bear to manipulate people to do what it wants. Normally we talk about the risks around job loss and warfare of AI, and those are real too, but this is another whole realm of concern. Now, I was sharing this over dinner the other night, and my son said, okay, so since we know that, can't we just say, let's stop and not do this? Great question. If we were smart, maybe we could, but the answer there is no also, because the upside of what AI can do is so immense, we're in an arms race to get there first. If one company or country stopped, the others would just keep going. There's no way we can rein this in, and we are simply not prepared for the changes it'll bring. What can we do? Honestly, probably not much. Stay informed. I definitely recommend you check out this podcast. Let leaders know we need regulation. Make sure we have trusted resources for double-checking things we hear. Be mindful when we're using these tools. Basically, just trying to minimize the damage in our lives. And again, the gains will likely also be remarkable, right? We shouldn't wish we don't get AGI, medicine, healthcare, climate. It really should help us solve a lot of our biggest problems, but it can also unleash other problems we've never faced before and are almost certainly not really prepared for. So that's Raise Your Outer Game for this week. Money, health, relationships normally, but AI will affect all areas of our lives. So let's be as ready as we can. Next up, our challenge of the week. This week, let's work on this stories are poison idea. Sometime this week, take a couple of minutes first, sit down, think about any stories that might be holding some inaccurate power over you. Maybe they're negative stories about yourself. Maybe they're about other people you know or types of people, stereotypes. In those cases, the harm is that it keeps us separate from others and fearful and probably, almost certainly, unnecessarily. I don't imagine listeners of this pod are much into conspiracy theories, so probably not much to worry about there. Another form is just worrying. What might happen? What might that mean? The harm there is the emotional load of the thoughts and also just being stuck in your head, running that loop. Once you have an example or two, so you can see this is a real thing that happens, next, set an intention to resist getting wrapped up in stories this week. As you go through your days, pay attention to what's going on internally. If you notice yourself getting wrapped up in a story of some kind, just gently shut it down. Nope, I see you, that's a story, not going there. You might also want to practice disproving it by checking for related facts and asking others for their perspective. But basically, just put some extra attention this week on the reality that stories have a special power over us and practice resisting that pull. All right, that's the challenge this week. Next up, highly recommended. Still reading Fever Beach from Carl Hiaasen, going a little slower than I thought, but nothing to do with the book, still loving it. Just music has been keeping me up late when I would normally read. Also still loving Murderbot and Stick, moving through those 1 week at a time. Saw the Phoenician Scheme movie, as I mentioned. I do love Wes Anderson. It was very enjoyable to watch. But when we left, my brother-in-law said, I have never been more confused by a movie in my life. And I know what he means. It's a strange film. I enjoyed it. I did. It's fun. But it's a little weird, too. So qualified recommendation for the Phoenician Scheme. For music, I came across a video this week. It was a Tiny Desk concert from NPR, if you've seen those. This one was with Stanley Clarke, the great bass player. And that thing just blew my mind. They're mainly a jazz group, so they have those chops. But he's a great fusion artist, too, so they played quite a variety of pieces. And the playing, you just cannot believe the skill and musicality of this guy. It's just like nothing you may have ever seen. For real, it's so tight and musical, so fluid. Their sound was great. I just couldn't get over it. Cannot recommend that highly enough. Link in the notes, of course. I was a Stanley Clarke fan from back in the 70s when he was making his first records. Also loved him in the band Animal Logic with Stuart Copeland from The Police. I actually saw that band in a club in Minneapolis in 1990. I went to see Stuart Copeland because I was such a huge Police fan, but was totally blown away by Stanley Clarke on stage. He's just a force of nature. Anyway, check this Tiny Desk concert out for sure and prepare to be amazed. All right, that's our show this week. Thank you as always for joining. Do please give us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It helps us reach more people. Otherwise, let me know if you have any questions. Have a great week. Keep up the good work. I'll see you next time.